I'm looking forward to our conversation. And I think when we talk about payroll and we talk about those types of things, sometimes people think, boring, what is this really about? And from a technical point of view, it's like, how important is this? And I think it's massively important. I think it's critical we have guys like you explaining what it really is to run a proper payroll system. And coming from a company like Moore Kingston Smith, I think you will be able to give us the right kind of advice. So welcome, and give us a bit of your backstory. Tell us how you got into this crazy world of payroll.
Thanks, Dudley. So my main background is HR. I've been a qualified HR professional now for 20 years. But actually, when I first started out, I started out in-house payroll, working at the Tower Hotel at Tower Bridge. It used to be run by the Thistle brand back then. And I was running a weekly payroll for 350 people and a monthly payroll for 150 people. If those of you who are watching this remember the dot matrix printers, we used to print payslips out on those, and holidays were calculated on holiday cards on massive lever arch files. So that was my first real job after university and my first experience of payroll. From then, I went more into the HR side of things, but have always had a hand in on the sort of in-house payroll sort of processing, coordinating, either liaising with our internal payroll team or liaising with an outsourced payroll provider similar to Moore Kingston Smith to ensure that the payroll is run correctly. I joined Moore Kingston Smith 10 years ago, started out originally in the HR consultancy team, and then in 2018 this position came up and I fancied a bit of a change. And I've been in payroll now for 6 years. Originally, the team started with a team of 13. That's now doubled to 26. And through a recent acquisition of WMT, that team has now grown to a team of 34. And we look after around about 1,300 clients and process around about 30,000 payslips per month. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of things that potentially could go wrong with running that volume of clients and that volume of payslips. But my team pride themselves on the service that they provide their clients in making sure that everyone does get paid on time and the right amounts.
I'm glad you mentioned the where it all started. I remember those days, and also when everything was printed, and then you had to have sort of sealed envelopes, and it had to be given specifically to the right people, and it was actually a very very
Yes.
manual process.
Yeah, I think this was actually pre the folding and automatic sealing. This was folding to make sure that the name and address fitted it within a window within an actual envelope. So yeah, this was before just folding the pay slips that are already heat sealed.
Yeah, and I can imagine folding a few hundred of those every month, or even just processing a few hundred, and then leave days. And I think where the difficulty, having run business and seen how these things operate, the difficulty for me often, and you can probably tell me how this works, is the communication has to come from your clients. I mean, they have to
Yeah.
tell you this person's been on leave, they've been sick, they're on maternity or paternity or whatever it is, or they've got overtime, or they've got some kind of benefit that's just been awarded them, or something like that. You need to know what's happened from the last time you've processed to the time now, and you need all of that data. And in my experience of this, and I haven't had recent experience, but it was always done on some sort of spreadsheet. It was quite weird because you had these spreadsheets with hundreds of lines, depending on how many employees you have, and then you had columns based on all these days, and you had to try and accumulate days leave and allowances for different statutory leaves and so on, and whether it fell on a weekend or it went onto a bank holiday versus a. Just tell me a little bit about that space in between clients.
It is an unusual one. It depends on the size of the client. I mean, we deal with varying size SMEs from owner managed businesses with just one employee all the way up to sort of about 3,500 employees. So they really do sort of vary in size and pretty much across every sector you can think of within the UK. Some clients still manage their holiday and absence leave still on spreadsheets, but those larger ones that have a bit more budget to play with, they tend to look at a HR information system where it can do multiple things. It can store employee documents, their right to work proof, and copies of passports, as well as a holiday tracker, which normally has some form of approval process so that someone can submit their holiday, it goes to their manager. Their manager can then see who is out in their team at that specific time, and then they can either accept or decline that request. The holiday tracking is difficult. Holiday pay in the last couple of years has become more and more difficult with the recent case law and looking back over an average of 52 weeks rather than the standard 12. And I know that as of April this year, things have reverted sort of back to make it simpler. But we still get month on month clients asking us, right, if an employee started on this date and this is our holiday calendar and this is the allowance, how much would they have accrued? So that we're effectively telling them, right, they've got this much holiday, and then they say, right, okay, they've taken 5 days, so can you deduct 5 days and make sure the rest of it's paid out? But that is still a common occurrence on a monthly basis.
Yeah, because it's the administration side of things, because it's never, there's nothing, no perfect timing. Nobody starts often on exactly the right day. They don't leave on the right day. They don't, maybe there's some kind of thing that has to be paid out, and maybe there's a payment that doesn't get paid out, and other portion that gets kept because they didn't use up their leave in the right amount of time. And there's, I'm guessing, all kinds of rules and regulations, because each client has got their own different ways. So there's obviously the statutory ways, but then there's also the individual employment contracts that you have to take into account.
Yeah, different employment contracts, different way of prorating, number of sort of how to work out a daily rate based on an annual salary. It does vary from sort of client to client. I mean, there aren't a huge amount of variations, but you can have at least sort of 3 or 4, if not half a dozen different variations on how you prorata someone's salary and what their day rate or hourly rate is. So it does vary, and it just adds to the complexity of running a payroll.
So let's say you're a scaling business, and you're maybe a smallish accounts department. Maybe you've done a bit of the payroll yourself manually, and now it's time to outsource. What should that person or that team be looking at a company like Moore Kingston Smith that says, okay, we will look after your payroll and your HR as well to a certain extent. What must they look for? What are the dangers, pitfalls, and what should they be asking? What are the questions they should be asking?
I think it's one, looking at some kind of business continuity. So, as I mentioned, we've got a team of 34. Each team member has their own client portfolio, but it's making sure that when someone is off sick or on holiday, that clients' payrolls don't fall through the gaps and you miss a pay date for a client. We have a very robust process where there is always someone who is able to cover in the event of holiday or sickness, and either manage or monitor the emails and payrolls, or if they've got capacity themselves, running them themselves. So I think that's certainly a big thing. The next one is compliance, making sure that you're either a BACS approved bureau, that you do have HMRC agent authorization to act on behalf of clients, because compliance is a really, really big thing. And it's not just about making sure that the RTI is submitted at the right time and the payments are made, because if you end up with unallocated PAYE and trying to reconcile and get HMRC to update things, can take months and months worth of sort of time and effort in order to correct those things. But we at Moore Kingston Smith, we use a GDPR compliant and ISO certified cloud-based portal for document and information transfer, so that our clients can log in, upload documents, and then our team get notified to say, Joe Bloggs from ABC Limited has uploaded their payroll data. We go in and download it. And we have a rule where we don't send any personal data or payroll reports via email. Everything has to go sort of via the portal. But it's all about the additional services. There are some bureaus out there who see themselves as pure data processors. They will take whatever data the client gives them, process it, upload the pay slips, and sort of that's it. I like to think that we at Moore Kingston Smith go a step further. We have a team of advisors. They will challenge data that they're given if something looks incorrect. Only today, I had a conversation with a team member and then a subsequent email with a client regarding a TUPE transfer. They were transferring a number of employees into their payroll. We know that the old payroll had a salary sacrifice pension scheme. And we were asking, right, well, do you have a salary sacrifice pension scheme in place ready to transfer these? Well, no, we don't want to do that. It's not our preference. And it's reminding clients, well, it might not be your preference, but it's actually the TUPE regulations and legislation that determine you have to offer this. At the end of the day, we will still process. If a client pushes back and says, no, 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 the employees have signed new contracts, they may not have realised that their pension terms are different. But if a client tells us to process something, we will process it. But we won't have done our jobs properly if we haven't highlighted sort of the risks of them sort of doing things in that way.
So just going to the systems side of things, because systems have obviously improved over the years since the paper-based days, and if someone is thinking maybe we should do it in-house because the systems are become so good that it'll just the HR and payroll system would just take care of everything. So we just have to put all the data in, and like magically the payslip appears and we're compliant. I know I'm simplifying it a bit, but do you find pushback in people saying, "Oh, we got a system for that. We don't need to go outsourcing"?
It depends on the system. I mean, as I said earlier, I've worked in HR for 20 years and haven't come across an absolutely perfect system that seamlessly integrates everything from HR and pushes it through into payroll. It still needs some kind of human intervention to review things, to add sort of data, whether it be bonus payments, overtime, any sort of outstanding leave or anything else like that. Obviously, certain systems are better integrated than others, but I haven't seen the perfect system sort of out there. And it all depends on the capabilities and on what each business wants to achieve. Yes, sometimes people can think that running payroll in-house is the safer option. They're controlling things, but you've got to think, well, what if that person's sick at the critical time when payroll needs to be submitted, payments need to be made, and payslips need to be uploaded? What happens if their IT systems sort of fall down and all of a sudden they lose all of their data? When we look at sort of the typical cost of outsourcing payroll, let's say a 25, 30 person payroll to sort of us compared to the cost of running in-house, we're typically going to be around about 80% sort of cheaper than if they were running in-house. Don't get me wrong, they're still going to need someone in HR or finance collating that information and uploading and sending that information to us. But at the end of the day, it gives them peace of mind that everything is being done. Our team are being kept up to date sort of annually and more frequently as and when needed on changes to payroll legislation. And no matter what happens, that payroll is going to run. Their employees are going to get paid on that pay date because we have a wider team that can be resourced as needed, rather than focusing on that sort of one or two person sort of in-house that if they both came down ill with something, then what's going to happen in that instance?
I suppose in that way, the payroll becomes quite a business critical part of the business, because you just literally can't get that wrong. I mean, that's why people are working. That's their payment for the month, for the week, whatever their
Yeah,
payment
and I
cycle is.
think I think many businesses undervalue payroll, but at the end of the day, their most valuable asset is their people, because without the people, the business wouldn't run. So it does frustrate me sometimes that sort of when people are looking to outsource payroll, they are looking to go, and I get that budgets and times are sort of tough at the moment, but for the sake of a few £100 or a couple of £1,000 max here or there, it's worth paying a bit more. The old adage, you get what you pay for. I would never ever go cheap when looking at sort of payroll. And you've also got to look at the services you get for that money. I know that there are sort of much cheaper options out there to sort of Moore Kingston Smith, but there are sometimes a lot more hidden costs. As I mentioned, you may have pure data processors that take the information, process it, and do it for a fraction of the cost that we do. But it's all of the employee queries, the employer queries, any other sort of advisory sort of piece around that with regards to, oh, we've got someone who's being terminated via a settlement agreement, and our lawyers have said this. We look at things and go, well, that's not right and not how each pay component should be treated for tax. and more often than not, we can intervene at that stage for the settlement agreement to be adjusted before it becomes legally binding. Otherwise, the employer may open themselves up for sort of huge liabilities when it comes to underpayment of employers and employees' tax, for instance. So we like to sort of offer a full service. It's almost a fixed fee for a set period of time, and we clearly set out our service level sort of agreements, and we also set out exactly what additional fees could be incurred sort of in the course of running a payroll sort of during a year. But it's often quite rare that sort of our clients would get charged over and above. And if they were, we always seek their approval before sort of implementing any additional sort of tasks that could result in higher fees, because no one likes to get an invoice at the end of the month and all of a sudden they realize, well, I didn't realize that asking 3 or 4 additional questions on something would result in a lot more sort of charges at the end of the month.
Yeah, that is true. What I sense as you're talking about this, I mean, you're dealing with, yes, it's very compliant related. It's HMRC rules. It's all the functional type of things. But you're dealing with human beings, and I get a sense that what you enjoy is being able to be there to help. So the standard sort of run-of-the-mill processing, that's fine. I mean, that's probably 60-70% of what you do, making sure those things are compliant, etc. But when you do have these queries and questions, as you mentioned earlier, having the conversation about salary sacrifice and so on, and helping your client come up with whatever the right solution is for them, because they don't always know. I mean, nobody sits all day long besides yourself and other bureaus and advisors. I would say the standard, the average business person out there, manager or let's say senior in a business, doesn't sit and read all the latest legislation all the time, doesn't always know where they may be treading in sort of rough, thin ice, maybe is the way to say it. But I think I get a sense that you quite enjoy that human, that the assistance around helping people make the right decisions, help them be more compliant, and also help them help their people more. And I like what you said there. But your people are sometimes your biggest assets, and it's not an expense or a grudge payment. It should actually be, you should feel like it's a reward for good work well done.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, business owners, finance directors, CFOs, they are experts at running businesses, at looking after the finances of the business. Why should they then try wearing a payroll hat and then understand all the complexities and compliance that sort of comes with that, when we can give them peace of mind knowing that all of that is sort of being looked after? And like I say, it makes sense to me that depending on the size of the payroll and everything else, the cost of outsourcing generally is a lot cheaper than sort of running it sort of in-house. And when you're looking at sort of a 25-person sort of payroll that may have a monthly gross salary bill sort of £150,000, for instance, or maybe less, if you, yeah, let's say £150,000, that's per month, and we are probably only charging 0.5%, not even 1% of that sort of as a fee. We certainly would be charging a lot less than sort of 1%. So some people look at it and go, "Oh, that seems expensive." Well, hold on a second, you're paying out £150,000 a month in salaries, and you're quibbling over the odd £100 here or there to get your payroll right. And sometimes when you put it into that sort of context, people will realise, wow, actually, yeah, it is. Do I really want to take on that liability myself? Do I want to go for someone who may be cheap as chips and I may not get that same sort of level of service? But that's the thing that sort of we pride ourselves here. It is a full business advisory service. If my team don't know the answer, they will come to me. If I don't know the answer, I've got colleagues within the people advisory team, employment tax, whatever it may be, to make sure that sort of whatever query those clients have, they get the answer, and everything sort of is all under one roof as a one-stop shop.
No, I like that a lot, and it is a peace of mind. It is knowing that someone's got you in that respect, because you still got to do some of the clunky bits during the month, as in capture people being off sick, people leaving, etc. Have you ever experienced the differences in I mean, we've just gone through sort of the COVID, the pandemic. We've got other things that sort of were never, the furlough schemes and all that were not really, they were, but they weren't, they were sort of around, but not to that extent. All of a sudden, you got this mass change in a short period of time. People now working from home, maybe getting other benefits such as telephone cost cover, internet lines, maybe equipment being provided by
Yep.
employers, etc. So the world has changed. It's not like they're now just paying a business expense, as in an office. There's a desk, there's a chair, there's so on.
Yep.
Now it's starting to get more and more grey for me. Anyway, that's the way I see. Because in the past it was you had to get yourself out of bed in the morning, commute, get to work. That cost was for you as an employee. Most of the time that was
Yep.
expected. But if you have to travel from there to a customer, then you could claim that back as an expense. But now it's changed. Now people don't have to do the travel. So they're actually getting the benefit of not having to commute. So there's a reduced cost, potentially not even having to have different clothes because they might not have to buy a new wardrobe every so many weeks because they're not having to dress up smartly to go to work. They can just have a have a top. I think that's these days. But so there's benefits on both sides. So tell me about some of those kind of conversations. Have you had those conversations? As in, what do we give? What do we take?
Yeah, I
What does
think,
that look like?
but it's also not just what do we give, what do we take. It's also how it needs to be sort of allocated and reimbursed. Some people think, oh, well, such and such pays £35 a month for their broadband. I can just reimburse that. But it's not as simple sort of as that. It all depends on what's stated in their contract as to what their location of work is, what the expectation is. And also, you've got to look at what the costs were for that person pre working from home versus now working from home. And most people nowadays tend to have very large broadband limits or unlimited sort of broadband data. So you almost go, well, on a second, why do we need to reimburse you sort of for that when actually you were paying that sort of originally? So again, it depends on what's being offered sort of as reimbursed sort of costs and expenses, but it's always best to get sort of tax proper employment tax advice to make sure that you are doing things the right way. That if you're paying £30, does that need to be grossed up so that the person gets the £30, or are you paying everyone £30 and then the net that they take from that £30 will vary dependent on their tax codes?
Yeah, because it gets quite. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, and it gets for me from the looking in from the outside. It seems to get quite complicated because some of the expenses could carry VAT. But
Yep.
now, so VAT could be part of the transaction. Now, can you claim it? Can't you claim it? Is that a business
It
expense or isn't it? There's like a
it
whole lot
all
of.
it all depends.
It all depends, and that's
Yeah.
probably why you need people like you to say, you know what, in this circumstance, this is the way it's going to be. In that
Yeah.
circumstance, that's the way. But it could be different for different people, and I think that for me was where I was going with this. Was I think that's why you need to be outsourcing, and that's why you need a really good provider like Moore Kingston Smith to be able to provide those kind of nuanced things that can get you into some trouble.
Yeah. Definitely. And it doesn't matter whether it's employer paid for sort of benefits that we work closely with our employment tax team when it comes to P11D season to get those submitted. Obviously, in 2026, P11Ds are falling away and everything will be payrolled. So that all benefits will be payrolled, which will be sort of an interesting sort of thing because whilst the HMRC have been doing things informally, formally, dependent on what employers want to do for the last 3, 4, 5 years, when that comes in as compulsory, again, it's just an added level of complexity. But on the plus side, it should benefit the employees because any changes to their employer paid benefits can be updated in real time in the month that they happen, rather than the employer having to keep records of changes throughout the year to say, right, well, this person had company car A from month September to December, and then they had company car B, which may have different tax implications from January to April, and working all those sorts of things out, or they may have private medical And they, rather than just looking at the annual premium, we can actually work out what the monthly premium is and then adjust it as and when the renewal happens, and if there are any fluctuations in costs. So yeah, the next year to 18 months is going to be interesting, not only to see what happens with regards to payrolling benefits. There are talks of removing the lower earnings limit and lowering the age for pension auto-enrollment as well, which could have significant cost implications sort of on businesses who typically sort of employ a younger workforce or pay sort of just above sort of national minimum wage, because they're all of a sudden going to have to be paying into pensions sort of from day one. And who knows what the change of Labour government in the UK will bring as well. I know that they've already spoken about a number of things from an employment point of view, but those are likely to have knock-on effects when it comes to payroll as well.
Yeah, and then yeah, when you have a regime change or a new government like we now have in the UK with the Labour government taking over, it's quite going to be very interesting to see how they make. I think they've tried to make some announcements. It's not going to change much, but from what I'm seeing is that whereas people get increases, they're moving into the next tax bracket, and it's like, okay, but I'm actually going to be, I'm literally living on a living wage, and now I'm ending up, creeping into the next bracket.
Yeah, no, definitely, and it's people understanding what they can do to lessen their sort of the tax burden, whether they sort of are in a salary sacrifice scheme and they can sacrifice more of their salary to keep them in the lower tax bracket, which actually means they're benefiting by paying less national insurance. Their employer may contribute the savings that they're making into an employee's pension pot. The skeptic in me thinks that it won't be long before any government turns around and says anyone born after X date will not be eligible for a state pension when they retire if they have paid into a private pension for more than 25, 30 years, then effectively it disqualifies you from a state pension. I'm sure that's going to come in at some
Wow.
stage. And that's the whole
Wow.
reason why auto enrollment came in sort of 10, 12 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Well, so I mean, it doesn't ever seem to be a static environment. It seems to be constantly
No,
moving.
no, definitely. And I think whilst people always think of sort of payroll is the poor cousin of finance and HR, when you actually look at what has changed legislation wise, and that this is removing COVID and furlough and everything else, there is almost this expectation that legislation changes year on year, and we call it sort of legislation creep. But people don't realise that it adds more and more complexity to payroll, because either your in-house payroll team or an outsourced payroll team keep updated and just take it on the chin and just carry on sort of working regardless. It's not a case of, oh, we've got more changes and we need to do this and we need to do that. No, you just get on, do what's needed for the job to make sure that everyone is paid sort of at the end of the month. And yeah, I don't see that sort of slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, it seems to be every year there's some sort of new announcement, and there's a new either capital gains coming, and then there's not, and then there is, and then there's a different stamp duty, and a this and a that. And I
Yeah,
just, it
or
never
freezing
seems
of
to
tax
be.
bands, which obviously with inflation increasing means that sort of people sort of effectively are losing out, because the tax band, they're not earning more tax-free sort of money or anything else like that. But inflation last year was at what, record high of 10%. It's now back down to sort of 2-3%, which is still increasing cost of goods and things. But I doubt the government will change the tax band freeze for sort of another couple of years until they need to.
I'm just thinking. I mean, let's say I want to start up a business, or I'm running a business. I mean, the challenge of getting new customers, finding good employees, making sure that your product or your service delivery is good, making sure that you keep your customers happy. Just that is already a big job. Do you see? I mean, maybe this is just an opinion piece. I mean, I don't know if it's more in line with like Moore Kingston Smith's opinion or yours. I mean, you can tell me. But do you think there's maybe a bit too much pressure on smaller businesses to want to grow to bigger businesses because of these complexities? Are you seeing anything like that in the market?
I mean, I'd probably sort of say from a personal point of view, it depends on the business. It depends what sector they're in and what they want to achieve. There are some sectors that are sort of massively sort of overpopulated, and it is going to be hard to stand out from the crowd and perhaps grow to the levels that they want. But there are others that may have found a really good niche and can actually speed up that growth process and perhaps grow quicker than sort of they expect to. So I think it depends on the person behind the helm of the business as to sort of what their vision and ambition is for the business, and to make sure that they've picked the right product or service in order to sort of basically achieve their end goal, whatever it may be. It may be to retire at the age of 45, 50 as a millionaire to be able to sit on a beach, or it may be to continue working and leave a really successful, thriving business to their family. There's lots of different sort of stages within the business journey that people need to sort of be aware of. But it doesn't matter whether you're a brand new business starting out, registering your PAYE scheme and taking on your employee for the first time, or whether you're at maturity and you're looking to sell the business, and actually you may want to get someone such as Moore Kingston Smith in to do a bit of a payroll audit to sort of basically give you a clean bill of health, so that if you are looking to sell the business, whoever's going to be buying it, you can say, look, we've done an audit, there's no liabilities, the pensions are all in place. I mean, we hear about some of the huge pension issues sort of in the news with regards to sort of Asda and other large sort of retailers that sort of seem to be getting it wrong. And for us to be able to go into a business and look under the hood and say, actually, yeah, everything is all well and running well, that's only going to sort of benefit any sort of buyer that is looking to sort of purchase that business.
Yeah, because there's in terms of M&A, mergers, acquisition activity, and acquiring businesses or businesses merging, or two competitors getting together and saying, oh, it's a bit tough out there. We might as well start working together because the market is changing, getting smaller, whatever that is. So there's quite a lot of shift. I'm that's my perception. Maybe it's just because I'm more aware of it now, but it does seem to be quite a lot of movement in terms of smaller businesses being offloaded or even just closing down. And maybe if just give your view in let's look at the, I mean, I like that sort of that health check concept, because when you're looking to buy a business, that could potentially be a tripwire that's waiting for you to pretty much fall flat on your face if you're not careful in terms of the payroll side of things. Tell us a bit about that health check environment. Let's say someone wants to go out and buy a business.
Yeah, so whether you're looking to buy a business or sort of selling a business, it's what we, if I give you an example of when we take on payrolls from either other payroll providers or from sort of an in-house team, we effectively sort of do an audit of the payroll to make sure that pay components are set up correctly, that they're treated correctly for tax and national insurance, that they're correct as an addition or a deduction. Probably the scariest statistic I have is that more than 45% of clients that we take on with an existing payroll scheme in place are non-compliant when it comes to pension deductions and contributions, which is scary. To think that auto-enrollment has been around now for more than a decade. Okay, some clients took it sort of more towards the 2016, 2018 mark when auto enrollment sort of that window sort of fully closed. But the amount of liability and the amount of years in backdated contributions that they could end up sort of having to sort of pay is probably the number one concern that I would say to a business that's either looking to sell or looking to buy. Make sure you've got your pensions sort of absolutely sort of nailed down and being processed correctly, because no one wants to sort of either take on that level of viability if it is incorrect, or realize that you can't sell the business because there's a huge amount of liability. And it's the same with PAYE sort of as well. We obviously with RTI, real time sort of information, everything is transmitted at the end of the month, but actually making sure that you're making the right PAYE payments, that you're using the right references for HMRC to match things up. About 18 months, 2 years ago, we took on a client that had an outstanding PAYE bill of over £100,000. It turned out that they had actually sort of, and they were being written to by HMRC. They were threatening debt collectors in and everything else. But actually, it turned out that through reconciling the payments that they had made versus their payroll, we were able to actually do a manual submission to HMRC to match the payments with the right references. And actually, all those payments were just sat unallocated in some pot somewhere in HMRC, and all of a sudden they were allocated to the right submissions, and that £100,000 sort of debt was written off in the space of about 2 or 3 months. Yes, it took a lot of time and effort to sort of get that resolved, but it's just one of those things that, as part of sort of these health checks, whether we're taking on new payrolls ourselves or if a client comes to us to go in and do a health check for them, that we can actually sort of support and assist them with.
Yeah, this is why I was so glad that you agreed to have a conversation today, because there's so much more to just payroll, and I know it's HR as well, and all the other things, and pensions and so on. But really, I mean, there's so many different challenges, and it's not just a one and done thing. Sort of, I just submit my number of employees, days off, whatever. At the end of the month, just pay my salaries and off you go, because it could be this sort of things creeping around in the dark, and you don't even know until it catches you. And I think that's why you need need a partner that can keep an eye on those things while you aren't getting busy with your with your business.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there are payrolls that are nice and straightforward and simple, and we don't ever have any headaches, or the clients never have any worries, because it just sort of runs really, really well. But both us working with the client and the way that the client works needs to be operating in a really streamlined and efficient way for that to actually happen. A lot of people just think payroll, the click of a button, if only. That would be the dream. But a lot of really established businesses that we work with still have sort of internal communication issues between finance and HR, and deadlines as to when people find out information, and we've run the payroll, we're ready to submit it and approve and pay it. Oh, whoopsie! I haven't been told that we've got we've got 3 leavers that left sort of last week, and no one told me about them. So it works both ways, in that sort of smaller businesses can sometimes sort of be the more efficient ones because they've got sort of fewer moving parts compared to the larger ones, but vice versa, if you've got someone who doesn't really understand sort of all of the processes that are needed to successfully run a payroll, doesn't matter how small that payroll is, it can still be sort of difficult and a bit of a challenge to sort of run it smoothly and efficiently.
There are two more things that come to mind as I'm listening to you. There's what happens during liquidations. So business has gone out of business. Now there's no cash. Can't pay let's say the last payroll. Can't pay HMRC. You must have come across that here and there, where now there's a liquidation. Everything was fine, smooth, rosy, dandy. Everything was good. Now all of a sudden there's a liquidation. What happens in that instance?
Then we've got part of Moore Kingston Smith. We have an insolvency practice that sort of goes in and specialises in sort of having those really difficult conversations with the employees on behalf of management to say, we're really sorry, but this is going into liquidation. There's no more money. We will sit down with them, complete forms that are needed to submit to HMRC to ensure that people get their redundancy payout and their sort of statutory notice pay and everything else. But what people often and business owners tend not to do, and they don't realize that we offer it. So our insolvency team can go in before it gets to that stage. So if there are cash flow issues, if a business owner thinks, I might only have 3 to 6 months left worth of money in cash to pay bills and pay salaries and things, actually, we can come in and help a business restructure its finances, look at increasing sort of payment terms with debtors and things like that, in order to really work in partnership. Because like I said sort of earlier, business owners are good at the business, but they may not have a handle on the finances. And sometimes, again, coming back to sort of outsourcing something, yes, we have an outsourcing team who look after bookkeeping and everything else, but when it gets that close to the line where a business may be about to shut, 3 to 6 months before it gets to that, a business is still, it is possible in, I don't know what the percentage is, but I would like to think in a lot of cases that the business can be turned around and saved if the right people are brought in with the right expertise, and if the manager or business owner is happy to hand over things to say, look, I'm out of my depth here. Please, can you help me sort of solve this so that sort of I don't have to let down all of these people who have been working for me for years and years and giving me X amount of sort of loyalty. It's always possible and never too late.
That's fantastic advice, and I think the ability to ask for help early on is probably difficult, but it's necessary so that, I mean, the you can probably catch it early if you are able to recognize and sort of just ask for help. I want to ask you, just change it slightly and just go into global business. I mean, there's a lot more global
Yep.
business now these days. I mean, everything is, it always seems to be who owns whom and who has to do withholding taxes, and if you're not resident versus you working, you actually in the country but you're actually being paid elsewhere, or
Yep.
you know you're elsewhere but you're being paid in country. So tell me a bit about that. I mean, what's the scenario around that?
So we have a global mobility team that can help advise, whether it's sort of a US or sort of any other sort of company. We work with companies across Europe, the Middle East, India, as well as sort of Australia, who either want to invest and set up a business in the UK, whether that be just having one person on the ground doing some sort of sales and sort of drumming up business, or actually opening an entity here with multiple sort of employees, or it could be one of our UK clients who are looking to expand out to America, to Canada, to South Africa, wherever it sort of may be. But as I say, we've got a global mobility team that can support and assist our clients in that. But also, being part of the More Global Network, we operate in more than 120 countries, and it would be very unusual for a client to come to me and say, I'm looking to employ someone in France or in Spain, and I need a payroll sort of set up. I will look through my theoretical Rolodex of sort of contacts and sort of find a local firm. Normally, we've got more than one firm in each country, so sometimes I can narrow it down to a city to say, right, in Germany, is it Bonn, is it Berlin, is it sort of wherever else, and try and find someone local that can pick up the registration of the payroll scheme, who can look after the HR bit, who can look after the payroll bit. So because global payroll is that complex, you do need people on the ground in those local sort of countries that know how to run sort of payrolls based on sort of where they're located. I don't know of anyone who does it fully remotely, where i.e. they've got all of their team based in the UK and they run 50 country different sort of payrolls and everything else. I just don't think that it would necessarily sort of work that way, because if you think UK payroll is complex, go and live and work in France, for instance. I think a lot of people would sort of never work in France because the regulations there are crazy. You go and work somewhere else, and obviously it's going to be somewhat easier, but it's always best to rely on sort of local knowledge when it comes to that. And we've got a big enough network that it would be rare that I don't know someone that I can refer to a client to.
Adam, that's it's been it's been fascinating. I can't believe the hour has passed. Literally, I mean, it feels like a few minutes, literally a few seconds. There are a few more questions I had, but I think let's wrap it up and maybe leave a cliffhanger for the next time. But is any, just before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd just like to share? Maybe a few golden nugget tips and tricks, and maybe just a bit of
Yeah,
about your company.
probably the not necessarily about the company, but the biggest thing that employers are missing out on is not setting up a salary sacrifice or a salary exchange pension scheme. We partner with a third party sort of pension tech platform called Husky Finance, who can assist clients in setting up a salary sacrifice scheme, full audit trail, everything's on an app, and typically they can actually do it at cost neutral sort of for the employer, because what they can do is they can either pay an upfront fee for the setup, or they can actually use the employer's national insurance savings to pay for that service for the first sort of couple of months, and then they can then pay that across. But it's probably the biggest area that employers can save money. It means that there's more money in employees' pockets at the end of the month. It can help people stay within lower tax brackets if needed, if people are right on that sort of cusp. But also, it's a fantastic benefit. And if it's a benefit that you can set up relatively straightforward and simply with virtually no cost to yourself as a business, why wouldn't you offer it?
Yeah, for me, I mean that's exactly right, and I mean these are the nuances that people not necessarily aware of. I mean there were other things that I was thinking in terms of people in the bigger cities like London, for instance, or even not so much, but maybe Manchester, and then you'd go to some of the smaller places around the country. The salaries that they have to pay are lower, so therefore they pay less tax. They will live and work in the city, so they pay higher salaries, they pay higher taxes, but potentially get the same output, if you like, from
Yep.
people. And for me, sometimes it's almost like an unfair sort of tax, if you think about
Yeah.
it, because you're getting roughly the same output for much higher cost, but you don't necessarily attract the right kind of talent. And I'm sure those are the kind of things that you
Yeah.
advise your clients around,
I
cost
think
wise.
I think with hybrid working and more people working from home, I mean, we as a team, we've got people based in Wales, down in Torquay, down in sort of Bath in Somerset. And for us, we don't differentiate sort of salaries based where people live. At the end of the day, if they're doing exactly the same job as someone working and living in London or Essex or whatever else, well, just because they're fortunate enough to have found somewhere in a cheaper part of the country, why should they be paid sort of any less? It's all about that sort of pay equity, looking at benchmarking sort of your roles. And yeah, there are going to be some instances where you have different branches and pockets of people doing different jobs where you can generally sort of differentiate that role may be seen as a necessarily a lower value, but you may be able to offer a lower salary because it's still relatively high and competitive with the rest of the local labour market sort of there. But I think the in the future, it's going to be very much be almost a one salary for role, no matter sort of where you're based, in order to be competitive in attracting and retaining the best talent sort of possible in your business.
The landscape has really changed. Thank you so much, Adam. That
Yeah,
was a fantastic session, fantastic podcast recording. I really
no
do
problem.
appreciate your time and all the wonderful knowledge you shared with us today. And thank you very much. And I do hope to see you on another episode. But let's cut it there. Thank you so much. Have a super day further. And to everyone listening, everyone watching, I hope you got value out of that. And please join us on our next episode.